The forbidden city of the Solari Empire was a place no outsider had ever entered. Its golden towers touched the sky, and its gates were guarded by tall warriors in shining armor. Inside, the streets were clean, quiet, and filled with the scent of strange alien flowers. Every citizen walked with discipline, their faces calm and emotionless. They had been taught since birth that feelings were dangerous. That touch was only for creating life, not for comfort or joy on a cold evening. A stranger walked into this world. He was not Solari. His skin was pale compared to theirs, his eyes sharp and curious. He wore a black jacket with strange symbols, and his steps were slow but confident. This man was Ethan Cole, a human from Earth. No one knew how he had passed the guarded borders. No one knew why he had come. The guards saw him near the crystal fountain. Their leader shouted an order, and in seconds they surrounded him. Ethan raised his hands slowly, showing he carried no weapon. But the Solari guards didn't trust him. They placed metal cuffs on his wrists and marched him through the streets. People stopped to watch, their eyes cold. A human in the Forbidden City was like a shadow in daylight, impossible yet real. They brought him to the grand hall of the Solari Royal Palace. The hall was massive, with tall windows that glowed in soft blue light. At the far end sat Princess Liara, the daughter of the High Emperor. She was known for her beauty, silver hair flowing like water, deep violet eyes that could freeze a man in place. Her gaze fixed on Ethan, studying every detail of him. He should have been afraid, but instead, he stood straight, a faint smile on his lips. The Solari never smiled, and this small act made her curious. "Who are you, human?" Liara's voice was calm but carried the weight of command. "My name is Ethan Cole," he said. "I came to talk." The hall grew silent. The Solari were not used to outsiders speaking so directly. One of the council members stepped forward, warning Liara that humans were dangerous, but she lifted her hand. Stopping him, she wanted to know more. Ethan was taken to a private chamber instead of the prison. No outsider had been treated like this before. The princess herself ordered that he be given food and water, but she also ordered guards to watch him at all times. Something in her heart, a feeling she could not name, told her that this man was different. That night, Liara walked alone in the moonlit garden. She kept thinking about the way Ethan had looked at her, not with fear, not with anger, but with something else, something almost warm. The Solari believed warmth was weakness, but Liara wasn't sure anymore. In his chamber, Ethan looked out of the window at the alien stars. He knew he had taken a great risk entering this place. He had come not for war, not for trade, but for something deeper. He wanted to understand the Solari and maybe to change them. He had heard whispers that the Solari's way of life was cold and empty, that they had forgotten the joy of touch, the meaning of closeness. He believed that one conversation, one connection, could open a door they didn't even know existed. The next morning, Liara entered his chamber without warning. She asked him why humans touched each other so much. Handshakes, hugs, holding. Ethan smiled again. "Because touch is not only for making life," he said. "It's for feeling alive." Her eyes narrowed, but her heart beat a little faster. She told herself it was only curiosity, nothing more. But deep inside, she felt something changing, something dangerous. And somewhere in the shadows of the palace, a pair of eyes watched them both, whispering into a hidden communicator. "The princess is speaking to the human. This will not end well." Asterisk. The sun of the Solari world rose with a pale silver light. The palace walls glowed softly as the morning breeze moved through the gardens. Princess Liara walked toward the human's chamber with slow steps, her mind full of questions. She told herself she was visiting only to continue the interrogation. But a small, quiet voice inside her knew there was another reason. When she entered, Ethan was sitting by the window, looking at the distant spires of the city. He turned and smiled as if he had been expecting her. That smile, open, warm, and without fear, made her chest feel tight. The Solari never smiled unless it was part of a formal ceremony. Yet here, Was this human, smiling without reason? She found herself wondering what it would feel like to smile back. "Human," she began, "yesterday you spoke of touch. You said it was for more than creating life." "Yes," Ethan said, leaning forward slightly. "It's for comfort, for connection, for letting someone know they matter." Her eyes narrowed. "To us, touch is controlled by law. It is dangerous. Because it makes people forget their duty." Ethan shook his head slowly. "Sometimes," he said, "forgetting duty for a moment is the only way to remember you are alive." His words stayed in her mind. She walked closer, studying him as if trying to see the truth in his eyes. Then, without planning it, she asked, "What does a human touch feel like?" Ethan did not move for a moment. "May I?" he asked softly. Her instincts told her to refuse, but her curiosity burned hotter than her fear. She gave a slow nod. Ethan reached out and gently took her hand. The contact was simple, palm to palm, fingers resting lightly, yet it felt strange and powerful. Liara had been touched before during official breeding ceremonies, but those moments were cold and mechanical. This was different. There was a warmth that spread from her skin into her chest. Her breathing changed, and she pulled her hand back quickly. Her voice was steady, but her mind was not. "That is unusual," she said. Ethan only smiled again. "That's human connection." That night, Liara could not sleep. She kept feeling the memory of that touch. Her people had always said emotions were a weakness that could destroy the empire. But what if emotions were a strength they had forgotten? The next day, she returned to his chamber. She asked him about human customs, about families, celebrations, and how humans choose their partners. Ethan spoke of love as something more than attraction. He told her how humans stayed together, not because of duty, but because they wanted to. Liara listened carefully, her mind painting pictures she had never imagined before. She began to see that perhaps the Shilari way was not the only way. In the following days, she visited more often. Sometimes under the excuse of questioning him, sometimes without any reason at all. Each time, Ethan shared more stories. He spoke about holding hands in the rain, about comforting a crying child, about kissing someone you care for. The words felt dangerous yet beautiful. Liara found herself looking forward to these moments more than anything else in her day. But not everyone was blind to this growing connection. In the shadows of the palace, a council member named Valen watched her closely. He had already reported to the High Council that the princess was becoming humanized. He feared this could weaken her authority and shake the foundations of Shilari culture. Plans were already forming in his mind. Plans to remove the human before his influence spread any further. One afternoon, as Liara and Ethan walked in the palace gardens, their hands brushed by accident. A small spark of warmth shot through her. Again, this time, she did not pull away immediately. Ethan looked at her with a quiet question in his eyes. She did not answer with words, but she allowed her fingers to remain close to his. It was a silent agreement. Something was changing. Something she could not fully understand, but could no longer deny. Far above them, on a high balcony, Valen stood watching, his lips curled into a cold smile. He knew this was the proof he needed. Soon, the council would take action, and the princess would be forced to choose between her people and the human who was teaching her how to feel. The Solari royal palace was quiet, but not peaceful. Whispers moved through its silver corridors like cold wind. Servants spoke softly behind closed doors. Guards exchanged silent glances. Everyone had heard the rumors. The princess was spending too much time with the human. Some said it was only political strategy. Others believed something far more dangerous was happening. In his private chamber, Ethan Cole was unaware of how fast the rumors were spreading. He spent the morning sketching the palace gardens on a small notebook he had brought from Earth. It was the only piece of home he carried. When the door opened, he looked up and saw Liara. She entered without the usual guards, her expression calm, but her eyes holding something restless. "Ethan," she said quietly, "there are people watching us." He set the notebook down, leaning forward. Because of the stories I told you. Because of everything, she admitted. Her voice dropped lower. The council believes you are changing me. Ethan gave a faint smile. Am I? She hesitated, then said, yes, but I do not know if that is wrong. They walked to the far end of the chamber, where the tall windows opened to a view of the city. Liara pointed to the streets below. Every Shalari you see there lives by the same rules, the same beliefs without question, she said. Even I followed them without thought until you arrived. Ethan looked out at the shining city. Where I come from, questioning is how we grow. It's how change begins. She tilted her head slightly. Change is feared here, Ethan. Then maybe it is time for them to fear less. He replied. Later that day, Liara attended a small council meeting. The air in the chamber was heavy with suspicion. Valen, the council member who had been watching her, spoke in a measured tone. Your Highness, it has come to our attention that the human is sharing dangerous ideas. Liara kept her voice neutral. He is under my supervision, nothing more. But Valen's eyes narrowed. If his influence spreads, the people may begin to question our traditions, and that could lead to rebellion. The word rebellion hung in the air like a blade. That night, Liara returned to Ethan's chamber again. She looked troubled, and Ethan noticed it instantly. What happened? He asked. They think you are dangerous because you speak of feelings and freedom, she said. Do you think I am dangerous? He asked softly. She hesitated, then shook her head. No, but they do. For the first time, Ethan reached out and placed his hand gently on her shoulder. You have a choice, he said. Follow their rules, or follow what feels true to you. Her heart beat faster at his words. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. In the Shalari Empire, duty was everything. But now she realized duty without choice was a cage. The next few days were filled with tension. Liara began noticing small changes in herself. She smiled when she spoke to Ethan. She asked questions she would never have dared before. Even the way she walked through the palace felt different, lighter somehow. But each change made her more of a target. Valen and his allies watched closely, waiting for her to make a mistake one afternoon. Ethan told her about a human custom called a hug. It's when you wrap your arms around someone to show comfort or care, he explained. Liara frowned. That sounds strange, Ethan chuckled. It feels stranger when you've never had one. She considered for a moment, then stepped forward awkwardly. Ethan's arms went around her, and for a second she froze. Then, something warm and unexpected spread through her chest. She stepped back quickly, her cheeks slightly flushed. I see why they fear this, she murmured, almost to herself. That evening, she overheard two young Solari servants whispering in the corridor. They say the princess touched the human, one said. They say she smiled at him. The other replied, their voices trembling with both shock and fascination. Liara walked past them without a word. But inside, she realized something important. Even small acts could plant seeds of change. If people started questioning why a princess could feel warmth from a human, perhaps others would begin to wonder what they were missing. Far away, in a dark council chamber, Valen spoke to the High Council. The princess is slipping, he said coldly. She is being drawn into the human's way of thinking, and if this continues, we will lose her to rebellion. The council agreed to watch her more closely. If necessary, they would remove the human by any means. And so, while the city slept under its silver sky, two different storms were brewing. One in the heart of a princess who was beginning to see the world differently, and one in the minds of powerful men who feared what her awakening could mean. Rain fell over the Solari capital like silver threads from the sky. The palace gardens glistened under the soft light of the moons. Most of the city slept, but Princess Liara could not rest. Her mind was a storm, filled with Ethan's words, his touch, and the dangerous warmth she now carried inside. That evening, she walked through the empty corridors of the palace. Her steps were slow, her thoughts heavy. She knew the council's eyes were on her, but she also knew she could not stay away from him. Something about Ethan's presence felt like a door she could never close again. When she entered his chamber, Ethan was sitting by a small table, a faint lamp casting a golden light over his face. He looked up and smiled. "You came," he said softly. "It is raining," she replied, as if that explained everything. She stood near the door for a moment, unsure if she should go further. But then, slowly, she crossed the room and sat across from him. For a long time, they said nothing, only listening to the rain tapping against the window. Finally, Liara spoke. "In our history, stories are controlled. Only the ones approved by the council are told to the people." Ethan leaned forward. "Where I come from, anyone can tell a story, no matter how small or strange." She looked at him with quiet curiosity. "Tell me one," she said, almost in a whisper. Ethan began to speak, his voice low and steady. He told her about two human lovers who met in a ruined city during a time of war. They had nothing, no home, no family, yet they found warmth in each other's arms. They stayed together not because of duty, but because of choice. Liara listened without moving, her eyes fixed on his face. The idea of choosing someone for no reason but love was almost impossible to imagine in her world. When he finished, she asked, "And this love, does it last?" Ethan smiled sadly. "Sometimes it does, sometimes it doesn't. But when it's real, it changes you forever." His words felt like they were aimed directly at her heart. Outside, thunder rolled across the skies. Liara stood and walked to the window. She pressed her hand against the glass, feeling the coolness of the rain-soaked air. "Ethan," she said quietly, "in the Shalari Empire, touch is only for creation, nothing more. But when you touched my hand, it felt like more." Ethan joined her at the window, his voice barely above the sound of the rain. "That's because it was more." They stood close, the air between them heavy with something unspoken. Ethan reached out, slowly brushing a strand of her silver hair away from her face. Liara froze, not because she feared him, but because the feeling was unlike anything she had known. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped back quickly, her mind shouting warnings. "This is forbidden," she whispered, almost to herself. "Maybe it's time to question what should be forbidden." He replied. Before she could answer, a faint sound echoed from the hallway, footsteps, quick and deliberate. Liara moved away from the window just as the door opened. One of her personal guards entered, his eyes shifting between them. "Your Highness," he said stiffly, "the council requests your presence at once." Liara nodded, her face calm. Hiding the storm inside her, she glanced at Ethan briefly before leaving, a silent promise in her eyes. In the council chamber, Valen was waiting. The other members sat in a semicircle, their expressions cold. "We have heard troubling reports," Valen began. "Reports that you have been meeting the human in private, that you have been influenced by his ideas." Lyra's voice was steady. "The human is under my watch, nothing more." Valen's lips curved into a thin smile. "Then you will not mind if we remove him from the palace for security reasons." Her heart sank, but she kept her face unreadable. "I will decide when his usefulness is over," she said sharply. The council murmured among themselves, but did not challenge her further. Later that night, Liara returned to her chambers. She could not sleep, and the sound of the rain only made her thoughts louder. She knew the council would not wait forever. If she wanted to protect Ethan, she would have to act, and more than that, she would have to decide if she was willing to risk everything for the strange, dangerous feeling he had awakened inside her. Meanwhile, in his chamber, Ethan sat by the lamp, thinking about the look in her eyes when she had left. He knew the walls around her heart were starting to crack, but he also knew that every step closer they came would bring them both closer to danger. Still, he had no intention of stopping, because somewhere deep inside, he believed that even in the heart of the coldest empire, a spark of warmth could start a fire. And outside, under the silver rain, the forbidden city slept, unaware that its future was slowly being rewritten, one forbidden story at a time. The morning after the storm, the skies above the Solari capital were clear, but inside the palace, the air was heavy. Liara woke with an uneasy feeling, as if the walls themselves were whispering warnings. She had avoided the council's direct anger last night, but she knew it was only a matter of time before they moved against Ethan. She walked into the throne chamber for the daily briefing. The long crystal table was surrounded by the council members, their silver robes gleaming in the morning light. Valen sat at the far end, his eyes sharp. When Liara took her seat, he spoke first. "Your Highness, our patience is not endless," he said. "The human has been here too long. His influence is spreading. The guards speak of him. The servants whisper about him. Even the younger council aides seem curious about his words." Liara's voice was calm. "He is under my watch. I will decide his fate." Valen leaned forward. "The council has voted. The human will be deported to the outer colonies within 3 days." The words struck her like a blade. "You cannot do this without my approval," she said sharply. Valen smiled coldly. "We can. And we will, unless you give us a reason to keep him." That afternoon, Liara went straight to Ethan's chamber. She shut the door behind her, her movements quick. "They want to send you away," she said, her voice low. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his expression calm but serious. "I expected this," he replied. "You're too dangerous for them. Not because you're a soldier or a spy, but because you make them think." Liara paced across the room. "They will not listen to reason. The only thing they understand is control." Ethan watched her for a moment, then said, "Then you have to decide if you're willing to break their control." Her steps slowed, her eyes meeting his. "You know what you're asking?" She whispered, "I'm asking if you want to live in a world where you can choose what matters to you." He said that night. Liara called a private meeting with 2 of her most trusted allies, a captain of the guard named Rael, and a palace archivist named Senra. Both had served her for years, and both had seen enough of the council's politics to know how dangerous they could be. Rael frowned when she explained the situation. "If you defy them openly, they will strip you of your title," Senra added. "And if you help the human escape, they will call you a traitor." Liara's voice was steady. "I know, but if I let them take him now, I will never forgive myself." While she planned, Valen was already moving. He met with a group of elite guards in the lower halls of the palace. His orders were clear. 2 nights from now, remove the human from the palace. Do not wait for the princess's permission. If she resists, restrain her. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. Defying the princess was dangerous, but Valen's influence was strong. The next morning, Liara visited Ethan again. This time, she brought him to the palace gardens, away from the echoing halls where spies could hide. They walked among the tall crystal flowers, the air filled with the soft hum of alien insects. 2 nights, she said quietly. "That's how long we have before they take you." Ethan looked at her. "Then we use those nights well," he replied. She felt a strange strength in his voice, as if he was not afraid. It made her wonder if she was the one who needed courage more than him. That evening, they sat together in the garden as the twin moons rose. Ethan told her more stories from Earth, of revolutions, of leaders who stood against powerful councils, of ordinary people who refused to live in chains. Each story felt like a spark in her mind. The Solari had always told her that stability was the highest good, but now she saw it was just a word they used to protect their own power. "I don't know if I can win against them," she admitted. Ethan leaned closer. "You don't have to win all at once. You just have to take the first step." His words sank into her like a seed. A decision began to form in her heart, though she didn't speak it aloud yet. Meanwhile, in the council's private chambers, Valen was smiling to himself. By the time the second night came, he believed the human would be gone, and the princess's brief rebellion would be crushed. He underestimated just how much Liara had already changed. As the palace lights dimmed and the city slept, Liara stood at her window, looking out over The silent towers, she knew the council's threat was real. But so was the pull she felt toward the man who had shown her a different way to live. The time for quiet conversations was ending. The time for action was coming. And somewhere deep inside, she realized that saving Ethan might mean losing everything else. But if she let him go, she would lose herself. The second night came faster than Liara expected. The palace halls were unusually quiet, as if the air itself knew something was about to happen. Ethan's chamber was guarded by 2 soldiers she did not recognize, a sign that Valen had already moved his pieces. Liara walked past them calmly, but her mind was racing. She had one chance to stop what was coming. Inside, Ethan stood by the window, his hands resting on the cool glass. "They're coming tonight," she said without pretense. He turned to face her, his eyes steady. "I know," he replied. "I heard the guards speaking." Her throat tightened. "It will take you to the outer colonies. And once you're there, you will never return." For a moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt heavy, but also strangely certain. Ethan stepped closer. "Liara, whatever happens tonight, don't let them make you believe. You have no choice." Her eyes met his. "They've ruled all my life. They've made every choice for me." She whispered. "Then tonight is the first time you choose for yourself," he said. Far below the palace, Valen's elite guards were preparing for the extraction. They moved silently through the lower corridors, avoiding the main patrol routes. Their orders were clear: remove the human quietly, with or without the princess's consent. The captain in charge gripped his weapon tighter, uneasy about going against her. But loyalty to the council outweighed hesitation. Liara left Ethan's chamber briefly, heading to the guard barracks where Captain Rail waited. "You know what's coming," she said. He nodded. "Valen's men are already in the West Hall." Her voice was firm. "Delay them, but don't start a fight unless you must." Rail gave her a short bow. "For you, princess, I will hold the line." Back in Ethan's room, the sound of distant footsteps echoed through the stone. It was time. The door burst open and 4 armored guards stepped inside. "By order of the council, the human is to be removed immediately," their leader said. Liara stepped forward, blocking their path. "By my authority, he stays," she said coldly. The guard hesitated, but Valen himself appeared in the doorway, his presence like a shadow that filled the room. "Your Highness," he said smoothly, "you've let this go on long enough. This influence ends tonight." Ethan's voice was calm. "She's not under my influence. She's under her own." Valen's eyes narrowed. "That is exactly what makes you dangerous." The tension broke when Rail arrived with his own soldiers. Swords drawn. For a moment, the 2 sides faced each other in silence, the air thick with the possibility of violence. Liara stepped between them, her voice rising. "If you take him, you will do so over my command, and over my body if you must." The shock on some of the guards' faces was clear. A princess had never spoken against the council so openly. Valen's jaw tightened. "You would risk your throne for this human?" Liara's answer came without hesitation. "I would risk more than that." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Ethan's eyes softened as he heard them, knowing what it meant for her to say it aloud. Valen raised his hand to signal his men forward, but Rail's soldiers moved instantly, blocking their path. The standoff grew sharper. Outside, the rain began to fall again, a steady rhythm against the palace windows. Finally, Valen lowered his hand. "Very well," he said, his voice icy. "But understand this, princess. You have declared yourself an enemy of the council." When he and his men left, the chamber felt strangely quiet. Liara turned to Ethan, her breath unsteady. "You're not safe here anymore," she said. "I was never safe here," he replied with a faint smile. "But neither were you." That night, they sat together by the window, the rain washing over the city. They both knew the line had been crossed. There was no going back to polite diplomacy. The council would not stop, and the next time they came, they would bring the full weight of their power. Ethan placed his hand over hers. Then we run before they can strike again, he said. Liara looked at him for a long moment. Yes, she said finally, we run. And we don't look back. Somewhere deep inside, she felt fear. But it was a different kind of fear, not of the council, but of what would happen if she stayed trapped in their cage. And so, before the next sunrise, the princess who had once followed every rule began to plan her escape with the man who had taught her how to break them. The night before their escape was silent. The Solari capital slept under a silver sky, unaware that its princess was about to vanish. Liara stood in her private chamber, looking at the city one last time. She had grown up believing these towers were her world. Now they felt like walls of a prison she had never noticed before. Ethan was already waiting in the gardens, hidden among the tall crystal flowers. When she approached, his eyes met hers in the dim moonlight. "Are you sure?" he asked softly. "Yes," she replied without hesitation. "If I stay, I lose myself. If I leave, at least I live as I choose." They moved quickly, taking the narrow service paths through the palace. Rael and Senra had cleared the guards from certain corridors, creating a safe passage. Every step felt heavier than the last. Liara knew that once she crossed the city walls, there would be no return. At the outer gates, they found a small transport craft waiting, an old human-made vessel smuggled in years ago for secret negotiations. Its engine hummed quietly, ready for flight. Before boarding, Liara looked back at the palace. Memories rushed through her coronation, her father's strict lessons, the cold council chambers. But stronger than all of them was the memory of Ethan's first smile. The moment that had started all of this. They took off into the night sky, the city shrinking below them until it was only a scattering of lights. Liara felt her chest tighten, but not from fear, from freedom. The air inside the small craft was warm, and for the first time, she realized she was breathing without the weight of expectation pressing down on her. Ethan set the course for a human colony on the far edge of Shalari territory. "It's not much," he said, "but it's a place where no one will tell you who to be." She gave a small smile. "That's all I want." During the journey, they spoke quietly, their voices soft in the hum of the ship. Ethan told her more about human life, about places where couples walked hand in hand without fear, about celebrations filled with laughter and dancing, about a kind of closeness that was not about duty, but about joy. Liara listened as if every word was a new star in her sky. When they landed, the colony was unlike anything she had known. The buildings were simple, made of stone and metal, but the streets were alive with sound. Children ran freely, music played in open markets, and people greeted each other with smiles. Liara felt the difference instantly. Here, life was not measured by rules, but by moments. In the weeks that followed, she learned what it meant to live without the council's shadow. She touched hands without fear. She smiled without needing a reason. She even laughed, a sound so strange to her at first. But soon, as natural as breathing, Ethan stayed by her side, patient and steady. He never forced her to change, but simply showed her that change was possible. One evening, they sat together by the colony's main square, watching the sun set in colors she had never seen on her homeworld. Liara turned to Ethan. "In the Solari Empire, touch was only for creating life," she said quietly. "But you've shown me that touch can be for life itself." Ethan smiled. "That's the difference between living and just existing." She reached for his hand and held it. The warmth she had once feared now felt like home. Her journey from the cold halls of the Forbidden City to this small colony had been more than an escape. It had been a transformation. She was no longer the princess who followed every rule. She was a woman who chose her own path. Back in the Solari capital, Valen stood before the High Council. The news of her disappearance had spread through the empire. Some called it betrayal, others called it liberation, and in whispers, a dangerous idea began to grow. If the princess could leave to find a different life, maybe others could too. But far from those political storms, Liara and Ethan walked together through the colony streets. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, she welcomed the unknown. Because now she understood something the Council could never control, that life was not only about creating the next generation, it was about the moments you shared, the joy you felt, and the freedom to choose who you shared it with. And as the night settled over their new home, Liara looked up at the stars. She no longer saw them as distant, untouchable lights. She saw them as places to go, stories to live, and a reminder that even in the coldest worlds, warmth could grow.